Thanks very much to the Socialist History Society for the invitation to talk about my book. I was very pleased to accept the invitation. My early formation as a historian took place within the context of the Socialist History Society's predecessor organization, which was the Communist Party historians group, and it was the Communist Party historians group actually that published my very first substantial historical essay. So I'm very pleased to be here today. Okay, so now I'm going to switch over. I'm going to share the screen and switch over to my PowerPoint presentation. So for the next 45 minutes or so, you're going to be hearing my voice, and I'm going to be going through these PowerPoints. But then I'll come back my face will appear at the end, and I'll be face to face for the questions. Okay, so I'm going to try and share the screen. Right. Okay, that didn't work, so I need to get this. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Right. Let me just get this going and then we're fine. Right, share screen. Okay. Right, okay, so the book is published next week. That's the front cover of the book. And what I have to say falls under these four headings. First, I'm going to talk about the book in the sense of explaining how and why I came to write this particular book and why it came out the way in which it did. Second, I'm going to talk about Stalin as an intellectual. And then thirdly, I'm going to talk about Stalin's library, or rather the history of Stalin's library. So history of the library itself. And then fourthly, about Stalin's pametki. Pametki is the Russian word for words and markings that people make, including in books of course. The existence of Stalin's library personal library was of course known to his family, his friends, his closest colleagues, and then after he died, its existence became known to librarians and archivists. Yeah, but the existence of the library and the fact that many books in his library contained his pametki didn't become known until the late 1980s, in the context of Gorbachev's glasnost and perestroika reforms. When the existence of the library came, a lot of attention naturally focused on the fact that, okay, he had all these books, he had this large personal library, in my estimate, 25,000 books or so, books, pamphlets, and periodicals, but that actually several hundred of these items he'd actually written. He'd made marks, he'd written words in, sentences, comments, and so on. Yeah. So there was obviously a huge interest in that fact, and of what that might actually tell us about Stalin in his most private moments. Now, the fact that Stalin had this personal library, and the fact that he wrote his book, there were these pametki, wouldn't have been such okay for kind of Western readers, outsiders. It was a kind of bit of a revelation. Yeah, not a huge surprise, but still a revelation. It wouldn't have been so much of a revelation to Soviet audiences, or at least Soviet audiences in the know. Okay, so people didn't know about Stalin's library, they didn't know about his pametki. But what they did know about, they know about Lenin's personal library. They knew that Lenin had a huge personal library as well. How did they know that? Well, because in 1961, a catalogue of Lenin's personal library was published, nearly 9,000 books. When Lenin died in 1924, there was nearly 9,000 books in that library. There was this catalogue published, and included in this catalogue was a number of examples of Lenin's pametki. And then subsequent to that, there was a particular Soviet kind of archivist, historian, librarian called Sharapov, who actually wrote a number of books and articles examining Lenin's pametki. So the idea that Stalin had a library and there were these pametki, it's interesting material, wouldn't have seemed as exotic or strange or whatever, unusual for a Soviet audience. Okay, so yeah, my book. Okay, so you can see on the screen there the contents of my book, and at this stage, if I was addressing a live audience, in the sense of a face-to-face audience, I would have paused and I'd have said to the audience, does this contents list surprise you? Right? Is it, Stalin's Library, Dictator in the books, would this be the kind of contents list you'd expect to see? And hopefully a member of the audience would have said, no, it's not. And then my response would have been, actually, it's not what I expected either. I didn't expect to write this kind of book with this contents list. It was unexpected to me. Okay, and I want to unpack that and explain why that was the case and why I came to write this particular book. Okay, so first thing is, what was it that attracted me to the idea of writing a book about Stalin's personal library, Stalin's library? Okay, first and foremost, it was the nature of the source, right? The source we're talking about, Stalin's markings in his personal library books, it's a unique source. It's different from all other confidential sources about Stalin. Okay, so we have like thousands upon thousands of documents now available which are revealing about Stalin in confidential private situations, conversations, his editing of various documents, all kinds of different sorts of personal information or about Stalin's personal kind of like dealings with this material and in these different contexts. Yeah, but it's really only in the library that you find Stalin at his most private, his most intimate, and his most spontaneous. I mean, one way of thinking about the library is to think of it, and I know this is a kind of cliche, as a window into Stalin's most intimate thinking. Yeah, think of it that way. But that's not actually quite right. In fact, that to say that, okay, the library gives us a work getting into Stalin's head, yeah, peering into his mind, his inner mental life and all that. That's true, but it's actually the library is actually more than that. All right, the library is all okay. It's a window looking in, but it's also a window looking out. Okay, because through following Stalin's reading of these books, we can actually see the world through Stalin's eyes to a certain extent, and in seeing the world through Stalin's eyes, we can actually get a much deeper picture of his motivation, yeah, and his and the way that he saw the world, and also of his personality. Okay, so the nature of the source was the primary thing that attracted me to the idea of writing this book. But also, this source was going to become available. Easily available. It was going to be digitized by Yale as part of the Stalin digital archive. So I was faced with a very interesting source, unique source, all that, but also a source that was going to become easily available to me through digitization. I could actually do the research for this book at home. Because the plan was to digitize all of the books that Stalin had marked in some way, nearly 400 items, and not just the pages which he marked, but the whole books, and these would be available digitally on Stalin Digital Archive. So that means I could study from my own home, and it also meant that it kind of, the main thing I was worried about going into this project was the technical challenge of being able to read Stalin's handwriting. But if they were digitalized, if I was street, I would have the leisure and time to do that. And of course, I could obviously ask people for help in deciphering Stalin's handwriting. So that was really the source and its immediate availability. Now, the problem was the Stalin Digital Archive project stalled at a certain point. And it stalled at a point at which only a third of Stalin's books that he'd marked, only 1/3 had been digitalized. The other 2/3 were undigitalized. So the only way of looking at those was to actually go to the archive in Moscow and examine them in person. Okay, which is what I had to do. But that really complicated the logistics of the research. The second thing that attracted me to this project was, well, it was a conceit issue. It was a conceit. And the conceit was this, is that actually my personal library, or at least that section of it dating from the 1970s and 1980s, wasn't actually that different from Stalin's personal library. Okay, it didn't contain the same books. Most of my library from that period was in English. Stalin's is nearly all in Russian, but it contained similar books. It was all similar. The things that Stalin was interested in, and he collected books about, and he read about all this Marxist stuff: dialectics, labor theory of value, socialist economics, historical materialism, class struggle, the history of revolutionary movements. Those are the things that I was interested in the 1970s and 1980s. So I was kind of like familiar with quite a lot of Stalin's reading matter. I mean, not the exact items, but the topics that they cover. So the conceit was, I was like, I wouldn't say uniquely placed, because there's other people like me out there, including some who are watching this are tuned into this presentation. But I thought I had a kind of skill set, background, knowledge, experience, which equipped me to be able to sort of take on this project. Okay, so the conceit factor, and then the third thing that attracted me to this project was that I wanted to write a wide-ranging book about Stalin, but I didn't want to write a biography of Stalin. I didn't want to write a biography of Stalin because there were already lots of biographies of Stalin, and more were in the pipeline. If I was going to write a biography of Stalin, I knew that it would take me 10 years, and I'd have to read all those boring speeches of Stalin, go through all his works. I would have to work my way through thousands upon thousands of files in his Lichny font, in his personal file series. I would have to read all that literature about Stalin and Stalin. A huge kind of task. Now, having spent years and years of my life devoted to studying Stalin already, I didn't want to spend another decade doing the same thing. So I thought the project appealed to me because it was focused. It meant that I could go in whatever directions I wanted to go in, and I thought this is a 2 or 3 year project, maybe 4 years. So that's why I thought a much more short-term project than a biography. So that was my thinking. That was my thinking approximately 10 years ago, actually. And guess what? In order to write this book, I had to do all the things that I didn't want to do because I didn't want to write a full-scale biography of Stalin. All the stuff I just mentioned, I had to do. I had to take on that research grasp, because that was the only way I was able to write this book. Okay, so this is a project that started a decade ago, basically. And it took a long time. Okay, it took a long time because of the problem I mentioned earlier, the digitalization limits and that kind of the logistics of actually accessing and going through all these books in the archives in Moscow. And it also took a long time because there was an enormous amount of research involved, a lot more research than I imagined when I started off. But those weren't the only reason. In fact, they perhaps weren't the main reason. The main reason why it took me so long, why there was this delay, a 10-year delay. I mean, I delivered the book to the publisher 8 years behind the actual the contracted deadline. 8 years. I was 8 years late with this book. The main reason for it took so long and delay was because I didn't know how to write the book. I didn't know how to write it. Now, I've written a lot of books. My experience of writing books is that you don't actually know that you're going to be able to write the book until you actually do it, or until you really get into it, right? And for years and years, I wasn't sure that I could write this book. I wasn't sure. I wasn't certain. There was a doubt in my mind, as well as that I could actually pull off this project. But what happened was that I had a breakthrough, a shift in my kind of like thinking about the book, which led to me to be able to write it. And the breakthrough was this, or there were several breakthroughs, but the most important breakthrough was the first one. And the breakthrough was this, is that my book wasn't just about the books in Stalin's library and the annotations he made in those books. It was also about the history of the library itself. Okay, so what happened was, and we're talking about early autumn of 2019, I wrote a chapter on the history of Stalin's library. And that's the chapter 4 you can see on screen there, Life and Fate of a Dictator's Library. That is my chapter on the history of the library. And once I'd written that chapter, I knew that I could write the rest of the book. I knew that I could do it. And in fact, I wrote an excited email to the publisher, my editor at Yale, saying, I can do this. I'm going to do this. And in fact, I said, Laura, let's set our publication date. We'll publish this book for absolute certainty in 2023, in March 2023, on the 70th anniversary of Stalin's death. Okay, that's when we'll publish this book, right? Okay. Well, as you may note, the book is coming out a year early. And the reason for that is the case, okay, part is because having written that first chapter, chapter 4, it went a lot better, a lot quicker than I thought it would be. Still great. But then, of course, the other thing, remember the date, autumn 2019, this was just before the pandemic. This was just before lockdown. So I found myself, as we all did, in early 2020, in lockdown, trapped. I couldn't leave the country, could hardly leave the house. I had nothing to do except to write. I was run out of excuses, run out of displacement activities. I just had to write it. So that's basically, this is my lockdown book. This is my pandemic book. Okay, so the breakthrough chapter, the history of the library, which I'm going to talk about later in this presentation. The second breakthrough was that the book wasn't just about the books in the library and the history of the library. It was more generally about Stalin and books. Yeah, the books that he wrote himself, or not the actual books, but his collected works, right? Biographies, official Soviet biographies of Stalin that Stalin had a hand in. And also the books that he edited. Okay, so The second chapter I wrote was chapter 2, the search for the Stalin biography of Stalin. And that was about two things. It's about official Soviet biographies of Stalin, his short biography, the Barbusa biography, and that kind of thing, and other biographical related things in the Soviet context, but also the process by which his collected works were produced and Stalin's role in that process. So Stalin and books more generally. Also about Stalin as editor, and you see that chapter 7 there, editor-in-chief, that's about Stalin as editor. That chapter I didn't write until a bit later, towards the end of the process, but I wasn't worried about that chapter because there was I knew that there was some really good material out there on Stalin as an editor, which I would be able to make use of, particularly, of course, David Brandenburg's book about Stalin's master narrative. His book about, not just his book, but his Russian golfer's book about the process through which the short course history of the CPSU was produced, and Stalin's central role. Stalin is the key author of that text. So I knew there was other stuff as well. I knew there was stuff out I could use. So I was never worried about, and I had some ideas of my own, particular bits of editing and stuff like that, which are in the book. So I was never worried about that chapter. Okay, so it's about history of Stalin's Library. It's about Stalin and books generally. Okay, and then the third thing was I realized that the book, to work, the book needed to have a biographical and chronological arc. Yeah, from the beginning of Stalin's life as a reader through to his death in 1953. Okay, that meant that I needed to write a chapter about the young Stalin. And that's chapter 3 there, you can see it, Reading, Writing, and Revolution. That is my young Stalin chapter. Now, in relation to that chapter, I had a real stroke of luck. And the stroke of luck was this, is that I met in 2019, mid-2019, yeah, I think it was 2019, yes, it was. I met Ronald Sooni at a dinner party in Finland, as one does. And he just finished writing his biography of the young Stalin. Of course, we talked about that. I've been waiting for his biography for decades, so I was very excited when I heard this. And Ron actually, subsequently sent me his manuscript for that book, which was published a few months ago. Fabulous book. It's the book about the young Stalin. Okay, so what that meant, I had a kind of like the young Stalin is a kind of minefield, particularly in relation to sources. But so I had a solid kind of framework for me to actually look at the young Stalin, Stalin's political and intellectual formation, obviously focusing on the particular things that interested me. Now, that chapter isn't just a summary of Sooni, by the way. I did my own research as well. In fact, I picked up on a couple of things that he missed, at least 2 things, maybe 3. Okay, so that does that. And then then finally, not the final chapter, but after I'd written the young Stalin chapter, then I got down to the book's big chapter, which is chapter 5, Bar Humbug, Stalin's Pametki. So, and that's the longest chapter in the book. So despite what I've been saying so far, out of the book's 90,000 words of main text, 40,000 are actually devoted to the Pametki. And the Pametki issues and Stalin's marks come up in all kinds of other parts of the book as well. So, it is, that is ultimately, that chapter is the main focus of the book. And I'll talk about that later. I'll show some examples of Stalin's Pametki on the screen. But but there was an important breakthrough that I had in relation to that chapter as well, which was, okay, so as I said earlier, the existence of the library becomes known, particularly the existence of these 400 items that Stalin had marked in some way. Big excitements to people want to know what he was writing in these books. General excitement about, all right, we're really going to find out what Stalin was really thinking, what he was really like, his deepest kind of like feelings and meaning, all that kind of thing like that. That was the anticipation. So lots of people started looking at this source, basically looking for, the smoking gun, which would actually provide the key to Stalin's personality and his motivation, his whatever, what he did, his life. They're probably looking for smoking guns. If you go looking for them, you're going to find them, basically. And lots of people did find what they thought to be a smoking gun in Stalin's library books, what he'd written or whatever. That wasn't my experience. My experience was, actually, so what? To be honest, absolutely honest, I didn't really come across anything that was surprising or unexpected in terms of what Stalin actually wrote in his books. Nothing really, lots of interesting things, intriguing things, but nothing kind of like revelatory, nothing I wouldn't have expected, to find. You won't find it in these kind of like remarks, you won't find anything about Stalin's thinking that you couldn't have actually found and deduced from his speeches and what he'd published and what he'd said in other contexts. Yeah, so I didn't find any secrets in Stalin's Pametki. And the other thing about Stalin's Pametki is that mostly they don't consist of words. This Russian word Pametki, it refers to words and markings. That's why it's such a great word. I loved it. I love this word. And most of Stalin's Pametki weren't words. It was like lines, underlinings, sidelinings. And when there were words, they were usually one word. I'll show you some examples of that later. Or if there were more than one word, mostly it consists of Stalin repeating a heading that he'd found in the text. There's a kind of aid memoir to his reading reading of book. So this was my other great breakthrough in terms of why is that actually Stalin's markings, like the non-verbal markings, were actually as important, if not more important, than the Pametki that consisted of words, of actual annotation, right? So a lot of my analysis of Stalin's Pametki consists of Stalin's underlinings and that kind of thing, and I'll show you some examples of that later. And here's the thing about Stalin's Pametki. If you're a sort of person like me who marks his books, mostly underlines things, puts lines in the margin, writes the odd word, that kind of thing. If you do that kind of thing, I can tell you now that Stalin's markings are exactly the same as yours. You say to Jeff, what's the most surprising thing you found doing this piece of research? The most surprising thing I found was how alike me and Stalin were in terms of the way we marked our books. And it's the way Stalin marks his book is the way that most people mark their books, if they mark them at all. So usually. Okay, right. Okay, so let's continue. Right. Okay, so what you can see on screen there is my favorite cult painting of Stalin, Comrade Stalin with Mother. It's called by a Georgian artist called Kutaladze, I think that's how you pronounce it. Dates from 1930. And as you can see, it's an image of Stalin the studious, Stalin reading, Stalin studying. And it seems to be that that image captures not just the essence of the young Stalin, it captures the essence of the mature Stalin as well. And this essence was Stalin was an intellectual. He was an intellectual. Stalin loved reading, he loved books, he loved ideas, he had a thirst for knowledge, he was a lifelong learner and self-improver. He was a serious and engaged reader. And I don't want to get into any kind of definitions of how you define what an intellectual is, but by any definition, Stalin was an intellectual. He was an intellectual all his life from an early age. Okay, so my book is a portrait of Stalin as an intellectual at work, a portrait, an exploration of his life as a reader. Yeah. Okay, so Stalin the intellectual. It's about Stalin the intellectual. So an exploration of Stalin's life as an intellectual, and also, in effect, it's a biography of Stalin told through an account of his life as a reader and his life as an intellectual. In effect, this book is the biography of Stalin that I was trying to avoid writing 10 years ago. Not a complete biography, because there's lots of bits messed up. Essentially, it's a biography as well as an intellectual portrait, as well as being an exploration of Stalin as a reader and of the books he read and how that reading impacted on his politics, his policy, and his action. Now, okay, so Stalin as an intellectual, Stalin as a reader, that's what the book is all about. But to tell that story is not in any way to deny that Stalin was a brutal dictator who was responsible for the death of millions of people, who presided over mass repression and mass terror. It's not, to say that Stalin was an intellectual, that I would say he was an idealist, he was a utopian, is not to actually deny that he was also a ruthless dictator. The very first, in the book here, the very first line in my book is, this book explores the intellectual and biography of one of history's, slip there, bloodiest dictators. And the book is full of evidence of Stalin and Soviet repression. There's a whole chapter, a whole section, which is headed Stalin's Terror. And it's a chapter about how Stalin initiated and orchestrated the Great Terror of the 1930s. So you read this book, you will certainly come away with a good impression of Stalin in a number of respects, but it wasn't my intention to gloss over this whole question of his dictatorship. In fact, okay, look, the thing that everyone wants to, the question that everyone wants to answer about Stalin, and it was the question I wanted to answer, and indeed, in a way, it was the question that led me to write this book. Yes, because I wasn't okay. I'd done stuff about Stalin before, written a lot about Stalin, but I wasn't kind of satisfied with what I'd wrote, and I particularly wasn't satisfied by what I'd written about the terror. Yeah, my explanation for the terror. So it's the question everyone wants to know about Stalin. how could he do that stuff? Yeah, how could he preside over, ignite, manipulate, direct, encourage these brutal kind of repressive processes, which led to the death of millions of innocent people who were like, not anti-Stalin or anti-Soviet. They were pro-Stalin in many cases. They were pro-Stalin. How would you explain the terror? How would you do that? It's one of the things that led me. I thought by writing this book, I could find a way of answering that question. Okay, and I did find a way of answering that question, but it wasn't the answer that I expected to find, because the answer I came up with was basically this: is that Stalin was able to do all that bad stuff, not in spite of the fact that he was an intellectual, but precisely because he was an intellectual. It's the intellectuality of Stalin that explains the repression and terror of Stalin. That's one of my fundamental arguments in the book. And there are two aspects of that. One aspect is that, as an intellectual, he could rationalize, he could abstract, he could turn, killing people into an idea or a set of categories, yes? Which certainly, at least during the 1930s, he had those personal contact. So, the idea, intellectuals are very well equipped to, abstract themselves, protect themselves, insulate themselves from the brutality of their actions or of the consequences of actions. But the other side of it, there's another aspect of it, and this is what I learned from studying his library books, from this project, was that Stalin was a feeling intellectual. Stalin's intellectuality was emotionally charged. It was because Stalin felt so strongly about ideas, about the ideas that he was committed to, about his cause. The feeling that he invested in, that's what made it possible for him to do all this bad stuff. That's my argument in the book. And I try, it's not an argument, I try to actually demonstrate this in the book. So, the nature of Stalin's intellectuality, the emotional base of it, as well as the rational base of it, as the key to actually understand and explaining the terror and Stalin's role in it. Okay, so. Okay, so if you recall, my next topic on the heading was the history of Stalin's library. Okay, so look, Stalin was a big reader from an early age, right? He was an intellectual from an early age. The movement that he joined was led by intellectuals. The Bolshevik party's whole ethos was towards intellectual leadership of the masses in a project of enlightenment and socialism and modernization. And Stalin's identity as a member of the Bolshevik party was, he didn't call himself that. I don't think he didn't think of himself in these terms, but in effect, his identity was that of an intellectual. Yes, his role as an intellectual being, to bring socialist enlightenment, raise socialist consciousness of the people, and that kind of thing. So. Naturally, what goes with that territory, and of course the Bolsheviks, of course, were, as a movement, as a party, and particularly its leader, of course, valorized theory, valorized fundamental philosophical issues, fundamental thinking. So what goes with that territory, obviously, is that you read a lot, you read a lot of books, you read a lot of stuff. Stalin's life as a young revolutionary was primarily the life of a reader. That's what he did, most of the time. When he wasn't attending meetings or involved in political agitation of one kind or another, he was reading. That's what he was doing. That was particularly the case when he was in prison, or when he was spending long periods in exile. That is what that's what it was. Stalin the reading that defined the young Stalin primarily. Okay, so but because of the nature of his life as an underground revolutionary in a legal movement, moving around a lot, getting arrested, all that kind of thing. Okay, he read a lot, but he didn't collect books. He wasn't able to collect books, at least not on any kind of permanent basis. So it's only after the revolution, after the Civil War, in fact, I think, mostly after Civil War, that Stalin begins to collect books, begins to build a personal book collection. Now, Stalin wasn't the only one doing that. All the Bolshevik leaders, top Bolshevik leaders, were doing the same thing. They were all accumulating very big personal book collections, and they were doing it because, like Stalin, they were intellectuals, like Stalin was. So there was nothing unusual about this. And of course, their role model, particularly Stalin's role model, was Lenin. Lenin, of course, an intellectual with this huge personal book collection, and an intellectual who worked as an official, as the leader, as the head of the government state, surrounded by books. So obvious point to be made about Lenin as Stalin's role model in terms of this building up of a big collection of books, and indeed Stalin himself worked surrounded by books as well. Yeah, okay, but there was something, or rather someone, that actually crystallized Stalin's personal book collection into Stalin's library. Okay, and this happens in the mid-1920s. That person is the person you can see on the screen there, Shushanika Manucharans. Okay, her diminutive was Shusha. So for ease of pronunciation, I'm going to refer to her as Shusha from now on. That's a photo dated from the 1960s, and it's on the back cover of the front cover of the book. You can see there, in Lenin's library, and it's her memoir of being Lenin's personal librarian in the early 1920s, right? Shusha, remember I mentioned earlier this catalogue of Lenin's personal library books, which was published in 1961. Well, Shusha was on the advisory council for that project. And I think it was that involvement that led her to write this memoir about her time as Lenin's librarian. What she didn't mention in that memoir was that she was also Stalin's librarian, or at least for a period. She was Stalin's librarian. And it was her kind of actions, I think, that crystallized Stalin's personal book collection into a personal library. And that crystallization was crucial to the survival of the library, or at least part of it. Because without what Shusha did in the 1920s, we wouldn't have an object of study. Okay, we might have the books containing Stalin's Pomeki, but what we wouldn't have all the other several thousand other books which also formed part of his collection. Okay, so how did this work? Okay, so I'm not sure whose idea it was, but either Stalin, or possibly prompted by his wife, Nadezhda Elueva, who worked alongside Shushanika in Lenin's office. So it might have been Nadia who suggested to Stalin that he should ask Shusha to sort out his personal book collection. Okay, so Shusha's quite an interesting person in her own right. She's Armenian background. She attended a women's a women's-only university in St. Petersburg before the First World War. She got involved with a Bolshevik political activist who she married, and he got arrested and sent into exile. She joined him in exile, and they went and stayed with Gorky on the Isle of Capri. I came back after the revolution, and Shusha eventually ended up working in Lenin's office as Lenin's personal librarian. Okay, Lenin dies in 1924. Shusha continues to work for Lenin's wife, a widow, and his sister as a librarian, but she also takes on this function as a librarian for Stalin. So what happens here is, and this is what I think happens, I don't have a complete documentary trial, is that Stalin asks Shusha to sort out his personal book collection, which by this time, which I don't know, I'm not sure exact number, but we're talking about more than 1,000 books, possibly up to 2,000 books. So he has a couple of thousand books, and he wants them sorted out by a professional, a librarian like Shusha. So he asks Shusha to do this. Shusha then says to him, I think, this is my theory anyway, is okay, if you want me to sort out your personal book collection, fine, but how do you want to classify those books? How do you want it organized? What do you want me to do? Okay. And that is what prompts Stalin to compose this note, which is not addressed to anyone, but I think its actual addressee is Shusha. And what you can see on the screen there is Stalin's scheme of classification for his library. And I'm going to switch to the next screen. Has it an English translation for those of you who can't read the story. But just a couple of points about it. Well, the first thing, this is Stalin's handwriting at its neatest. Yeah, I don't think there's a neater example of Stalin's handwriting in the whole of his personal archive. But the second thing is, it's obviously, we just look at it, you don't need to be able to read it to see that it's actually it's composed, isn't it? It's a composed kind of, Stalin took some time about this. Okay, and that's in English. That's what you can see. So this was Stalin's library classification scheme, and you can see all the subject headings he wants his books to be classified under, and including, as you see, separate classification for those figures there. You look at that, basically you get a good idea of the range of Stalin's interests as a reader. Okay, Stalin's reading is like heavily concentrated on Marxism, Marxist stuff of one kind or another, but not just that. His reading interests are far broader than just Marxism. But you just look at that, and you can see, what kind of stuff that he was interested in. Okay, so that's the first. Stalin devising his classification scheme for Shusha to actually catalogue and organize his work, his library. That's the first step in the direction of the crystallization of Stalin's private book collection into a personal library. The second step, and again, I think, I'm presuming this was Shusha's idea rather than Stalin's, but I might be wrong about that, is that he acquires an ex libris stamp. Now, what you can see on the screen is not Stalin's ex libris stamp, it's Lenin's ex libris stamp. Okay, so when Shusha is Lenin's librarian, one of the things she does, I think, is that she, well, no, in this case, I know, she actually stamps his book like that. You can see the stamp at the bottom there, it says Biblioteca and Lenin always published under the name N. Lenin rather than V.O. Lenin when he was alive. Okay, so that she had the stamp and she numbered his books. This is a book by Lunacharsky, Soviet Commissar for Enlightenment in the 1920s, and what he said up there at the top of the screen, it's this is the dear Vladimir Ilyich, And he says, it's a work that you seem to have approved of once upon a time. And it's, he presents this book to Lenin, it says at the end, yeah, with deep love. And then you see Lunacharsky's signature there, and you can see the date on the left, which is 1923. Okay, so that's Lenin's library stamp. Okay. This is Stalin's library stamp. Now, I'll just flick back. Okay, Lenin's stamp, Stalin's stamp. Same, yes, agreed? It's the same stamp, same stamp. I think it's the same handwriting, and I'm assuming it's Shusha's handwriting. Yeah, okay, so Stalin's library has a classification, an organization to it. Now it also has an ex libris stamp, which identifies items which belong to this library. And what Shusha does, Shusha, I think that she is the one who numbers these, who stamps and numbers Stalin's existing book collection. This book, by the way, is a book by Bukharin. It's Revolutionary Theoretique. Okay, and the revolutionary theorist in question is Lenin. This is a Bukharin pamphlet about Lenin. Okay. Oh. So I'm trying to get to the next screen. It seems to be working. What have I done? Ah, okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. So this is a book by I don't pronounce the name, but Kverin, okay. Lenin, I'll do it in English. Lenin, Conspiratorialism in October. It's about 1917, and it's to do with, the book is to do with polemics against Trotsky's account of 1917 in Lessons of October. That book's going to come up again later. Okay, you can see it has the stamp, and it has the number 1252. So mid-1920s, Stalin had at least that number of books, possibly more. Okay. Yeah, okay, so classification scheme, the stamping and numbering of the books. And the third thing that crystallizes Stalin's book collection into a personal library is that it acquires a physical center of gravity. Now, okay, let me first, before I finish about Shusha. What happened to Shusha is that I think she only works for Stalin for a couple of years in the 1920s. She classifies his existing collection, she stamps them, she numbers them, and then I think she goes back for her main work, which was for Lenin's, for Krupskaya, and for Lenin's sister, Maria. And then in 1930, Shusha, she moves from the Kremlin to a job at the Institute of Marx, Engels, and Lenin, EMO. So she works in the Lenin section of the Institute of Marx, Engels, and Lenin, the section that's devoted to the publication of Lenin's collected works. She works in that section for 10 years, and then in 1940 she transfers to the Stalin section. She works in the section dealing with Stalin's collected works, and then she retires from the institute in 1955. Okay, yeah, in the mid-1930s, the library acquires a further aspects of its identity in the form of Stalin's dacha. Mid-1930s, a new dacha is constructed for Stalin just outside Moscow, on the outskirts of Moscow, not actually very far outside Moscow, actually. And yeah, the centerpiece of this dacha is its library room. Okay, and you can see that's a photo of the library room. It's quite a big room, some big bookcases, they're very wide shelves, so you can stack a lot of books. But most of the books are kept in an adjoining building. Okay, so Stalin's personal book collection, where was it? It was to be found all over the place, wherever he lived and worked, just in his office, in various dachas, wherever he was. But when Stalin acquires his conceiver dacha in the mid-1930s, the library, what the phrase I'm using, acquires a physical kind of center of gravity. Because the thing about this dacha is this is where Stalin spends a lot of time from the mid-1930s onwards. Huge amount of time he spends at the dacha, and in fact, the dacha was where dacha is, I'm sure you know, was where Stalin died in March 1953. And it was actually in his library room. I mean, what happens, or at least as far as my understanding is, that one night Stalin retired to his library room, as he often did, and he had a stroke. and then later on, the staff found him. So quite a kind of like poetic ending in a way. Okay, that's another shot from the dacha, and you can see the map. Stalin was also big on maps. I have a section on that in the book. Yeah. Okay. So. What happens to the library after Stalin's death? Okay, when Stalin dies, the plan is to turn the dacha into a Stalin museum. Okay, and I'm assuming, I don't know this for certain, but I'm assuming that part of the plan would have been to consolidate his personal library at this Stalin museum, because that is what happened to Lenin's personal book collection, the kind of Lenin museum residence of Gorky. So the plan was to do similar for Stalin, but have a Stalin museum at his dacha, including his personal library book collection. Okay, that doesn't happen. What happens is 20-party Congress, Khrushchev's denunciation of Stalin, and the Stalin Museum project was abandoned, and subsequent to that, decisions were taken to what's the word I'm looking for? To get rid of all his personal effects. Yes, to get rid of them, or not to give them away, to disperse them in various forms, including his library book. And that's what happens to Stalin's library after he dies. We're not sure how many books he had when he died, but my estimate is approximately 25,000, right? But the vast bulk of that collection was dispersed to other libraries, disappeared into other libraries. What was retained, was firstly those texts that Stalin had marked, the text with his pametki, but also those books which were identifiably part of his personal library. Yeah, principally the books that were that had his ex libris stamp on, that were stamped as being part of his library. Now, okay, now after Shusha leaves Stalin's service, mid to late 1920s, the numbering of the book stops, but the stamping doesn't. The stamping of the books continues until the early 1930s, until about 1932, 1933. And what that means is that there's about 5,000 books with this ex libris stamp, this system that had been devised by Shusha in the mid 1920s. And it's the fact that you have this collection of his books, that's what actually saves it for posterity. Yeah, that's why it was retained by the party archive. Why they stopped stamping the books, I don't know. I think it's presumably something to do with staff change that occurred at that particular time. Okay, so going back to the point I made earlier, it's Shusha's efforts to consolidate Stalin's personal book collection into a personal library that in the long run, saves at least part of that library for posterity. Without Shusha's involvement, about a role, about the stamp, about the numbering, that wouldn't have happened. Okay, so the books that Stalin had marked, the ones with pametki, go into the party archive. The rest of the collection, the books that are stamped, and also books that have other markings. Some other books which have other markings which identify than was meant Stalin. In this particular example, you see is Stalin's signature. It's at the very top of the page. That's Stalin's signature. So books that had anything that identified them as belonging to Stalin, those books were retained as part of a collection appertaining to Stalin's personal library, and they were like housed in the library of the Institute of Marxism, what became the Institute of Marx Engels, the Marx Engels Institute. Okay, which after the collapse of the Soviet Union became an independent library in Moscow, social political library. But then just recently, that library has become part of the State Historical Library. So it's now a subsection of State Historical Library. And that's where these 5,000 or so books of Stalin's are to be found. And the last time I was there, which was actually as recently as last September, when I first visited the library nearly 10 years ago, I tried to get them to let me go into the stacks and look at these books on the shelf. So I wanted to let me to browse through. Okay, the collection we're talking about here are the collection of which was unmarked, but who knows? I just wanted to have a look at them, but they refused, and they refused this time again. But on this occasion, they did agree to take some photographs for me. So this is the stacks you can see here. This particular photograph actually has a lot of books by Kautsky, including at the end here. You can far right, you can see Kautsky's book on Thomas More. Now, these particular books of Stalin's by Kautsky are not marked by him. They don't contain his Pametki, at least as far as we know. And that's why they're in this library rather than in the archive. But Stalin read quite a lot of Kautsky. And okay, one of the points I'm making in the book is that, okay, he read Kautsky as a political opponent, and he responds very negatively to a lot of what Kautsky writes. I've got an example of that coming up later. But what one can also see when Stalin is reading Kautsky and marking up his text is that Stalin is also learning. Yeah, I mean, he's attacking Kautsky, he's responding negatively and emotionally to what Kautsky is arguing, but also in many other places, it's quite obvious that Stalin is marking the text because he's finding what Kautsky says as being interesting and useful. And that was this. Okay, and then, yeah, and there's another, it's another shot from these shelves. And yeah, I just want to draw your attention to the item at the end here, which is an Italian Russian dictionary. A lot of different dictionaries form part of Stalin's collection. In fact, we know that Stalin attempted to learn several foreign languages. Okay, I've just set a watch hold up, so I've obviously been going on too long. Okay, let's. Okay, so what do you want me to do, Francis?
Oh yeah, well, please finish off, Jeff. But
how long have I been speaking? Sorry, apologies.
An hour and a bit.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, I've just got some examples of Stalin Pametki here, which I'm going to go through very quickly. Yeah, and then we can get questions. Really apologize. I knew this was happening. Okay, so this is the front cover of a short course history of the USSR. It's a very famous Soviet school textbook from the mid-1930s, which Stalin was heavily involved in the production of in various ways. And what this is just a good photo. And you can see there that Stalin, what's this is Stalin wants to change the title of the book from short course history of the USSR. He wants to change the title from that to History of the USSR, a short course. Now, actually, what happens is that Stalin's proposed change doesn't happen, and the book's actually published with its original title, which is a short course history of the USSR. Now, I had a lot more to say about that book, but I won't detain you any further. Okay. Now, this is this Kavirian book I mentioned earlier. Okay, and what you can see at the top of the book is something that Stalin's written. Stalin sometimes did that. As an avid memoir, he would kind of like write on the front covers of books of Germans. And what he's written, and this, as I said earlier, this is a book, part of a polemic against Trotsky's view of the Russia of 1917. Okay, and what Stalin has written down, he said, tell Molotov that Trotsky lied to Lenin about the course of the insurrection. Okay, this is a reminder for him to do that. And this particular book, if we come in, okay, so this is Stalin's annotation. Okay, now what you see there is a typical Pameki by Stalin, right? There are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of that. That's the typical kind of thing. And he's underlined a point here that in complex political situations, you need a deep analysis of the situation as to know that. Okay, and this is the same book, yeah. And he's underlined another point here, and he's changed pens, and there's a pencil here, so sometimes he did that as well. Okay, and his annotations continued. And yeah, okay, go back to that. I think on the right-hand side, I think that's a number 1. And then he's number 2. Stalin did this. He numbered points, all right? Okay, and this is an example of Stalin's number of points. Yeah, and there's another thing here, which is a kind of a quote from Lenin, or a statement by Lenin, or arguing against the constitutional illusions of the Congress of Soviets. Yeah, okay, and he's written beside NB. Okay, yeah, I think that's an NB, note bene, in Latin script. Now, that NB was Stalin's most frequent annotation. NB, hundreds and hundreds of NBs scattered throughout his books, not just his books, also through Stalin's documents as well. So that's his most crucial annotation. Okay, and another annotation here. Okay, and this is an example, kind of rather extreme example of Stalin's numbering of points, and this is from Lenin. Okay, and it's from his kind of pamphlet, polemic, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and it's a polemic against Lenin's opponents within the Social Democratic Party. And what Stalin has like underlined and numbered here is Stalin's characterization of his opponents and the opposition to his position. And they're basically a series of kind of insults. Okay, and this annotation dates is from Lenin's collected works, published in the mid-1920s. So we can assume that that's when Stalin read this text and when he marked that text. Okay, and in the book, I don't particularly address this particular text, but I make the general point is that Stalin throughout his life was obsessed by the history of the revolutionary movement and its pre-revolutionary factional struggles and battles. He was absolutely insistent. But there was a very important point that I missed here. Maybe Francis, I can ask you a question here. So this is the mid-1920s, yes? Sorry, go back. Why is Stalin making, why is Stalin doing that annotation? What's going on here? What do you think? Mid-1920s. Given what I've just said about what it is.
Well, it looks like points for a polemical speech or article.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that. Yeah. He's coming through Lenin to come up with arguments that he can actually use in his contemporary political battles within the party against Trotsky, Zinoviev, and all of that kind of thing. Okay, and this one is this is from Kautsky's Terrorism and Communism. Okay, and you can see that Stalin has written something here. I'm not going to, because of time, I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's in the book. And anyway, it's actually not that interesting. I will draw your attention to what he writes further down the page, at the bottom of the page there, where you can see it's, maybe you can't see, but what he's written there is ha ha. Okay, I said earlier that NB was Stalin's most frequent annotation. His second most frequent annotation, again, hundreds of examples of it, is this one, ha ha, ha ha. Okay. Okay, this is an annotation of a book about Russian military history. What Stalin has annotated here is a section about Peter the Great's failure to conquer the whole of Finland during the Great Northern War. And Stalin has kind of like marked off some statistics about that particular war. Okay, now this caught my eye because I think Stalin read this in the late 1930s. And I think it might have been on his mind when the Soviet Finnish War comes along, and it doesn't go too well. Okay, the Soviets win the Soviet Finnish War, but it's not an easy war, and they suffer high casualties. And when they're in the the post-mortem of the war, up in the spring of 1940, there's a conference, military conference. Stalin's president. Stalin makes significant intervention in a discussion about what the lessons of the war were, what actually happened. And I think that Stalin draws upon this historical knowledge as part, and basically what he says, yeah, okay, yeah, okay, it was a tough war. We underestimated the Finns. We thought it was going to be an easy war. We weren't as modern and forward-looking as we weren't as well equipped as we could have been. But in the end, we won. Okay. Yeah, this is my favorite all-time Stalin annotation. Okay, and this is an annotation of an article in the journal Military Thought, dates from 1946. And at the bottom there, you can see, okay, Stalin is responding to a point made by the author, which is about the role of willpower and leadership in winning battles, right? That's the point the author is making. And Stalin's response to that point, well, he said two things. On the left-hand side, he said, not that. And on the right-hand side, he's written, the most important thing is knowledge of Marxism. That's what he's saying. So this is not, the most important thing is knowledge of Marxism. And, look, again, it's the point I'm making in the book. In the thousands upon thousands of pages that Stalin marked, there is not a single shred of evidence that he had any doubts about Marxism, about his Marxist belief. Nothing. Stalin's Marxism, on the basis of the evidence in the library, was completely authentic. Stalin had no doubts about that. And this is, I think, is a good illustration of Stalin's lifelong commitment to Marxism. This is what this is. This is from Stalin's editing of the short course history of the CPSU, and you can see here he's crossed out a whole section. What this section is, this is a section about Stalin. It's about Stalin's leadership and struggles in the Bolshevik organization in the Caucasus, right? And you can see Stalin has crossed out the whole section, and there are many, many pages, paragraphs where Stalin did the same. Basically, as far as the short history's treatment of the pre-revolutionary history of the party, Stalin goes to great lengths to actually reduce his presence and his role. He effectively, almost eliminates himself from the narrative of the pre-revolutionary history, which means that there's only one prominent personality in the short course as far as pre-revolutionary history is concerned, and that is Lenin. And that is actually Stalin's intention in this particular bit, to sideline himself, to exclude himself, or make himself secondary to the narrative, and make Lenin central to the story, the party story, until 1970. Now that the book changes, the picture changes after Lenin's death. Then Stalin comes much more into the picture. Okay, and then final example of Stalin's Pametki, and this is a document example. This is a summary of a discussion among economists about a new political economy textbook. And this is the discussion that leads up to Stalin's last major publication, which was Economic Problems of the USSR in 1952. Okay, and what Stalin's wrote at the top there is, what this is the discussion about the character of economic laws under socialists. And so what Stalin's written at the top there is what economic laws. And then down the sideline there, well, you can see he's written various things. He's written several times, well, yeah, 3 times anyway. Nishto, not that. And he's also written ha ha, he as well. Okay, so that this is his response to that document. And again, it's a typical, perhaps graphic illustration of Stalin's comment. Okay, so I've got to the end of my presentation. I'm going to come to a very, very quick set of conclusions. Actually, I'm going to, can I stop sharing the screen here? How do I do that? Yeah, okay. Am I back on screen now? Fine. No, apologies for the length of the presentation. Okay, so I'm going to come to give you a conclusion, some summary conclusions here. I don't really want to do that, because to use a terrible cliche, it's not where I end up in this book, that matters. It's how I get there. It's the journey, not the destination that actually counts. Okay, but since I've arrived at the end of this talk, I have to sort of give you some conclusion. Let me just give you just make 3 points. Firstly, what does my book show? It shows that firstly that Stalin was a serious intellectual and reader. Now, to say he was a serious intellectual reader doesn't mean to say he was a great intellectual. I don't believe that's the case, but he certainly had his qualities as an intellectual, and we can talk about those more if you want. Second thing, again, this is what I'd not learned from the library, but what the library confirms, is that Stalin's belief in Marxism, his commitment to Marxism was wholly authentic, no doubt about that whatsoever. And also my point, remember the point I made earlier, is that Stalin's commitment to Marxist ideology was an emotionally charged commitment. Okay, and it's that emotional charge to it that makes it so powerful. So powerful a motivator as far as Stalin's political action is concerned. Okay, and the third conclusion is that it was books and reading that drew Stalin to the revolution, and it was his private reading that remained essential to his autonomy as a political actor. One of the things I try to show in the book is how what I call Stalin's extracurricular reading impacted on what he actually did. The political strategies he pursued, the policies he tried to implement, his kind of vision about how Soviet socialism was going to develop in the long term. My argument is that Stalin's independent private life as a reader is essential to understanding the directions in which he goes. Okay, on that point, I'll finish. Thank you.